This is a study that we completed, just released early this year, and it was about the topic of advanced emergency information services. And it seems to me that this is a critical time in the development of this technology. We just had a panel where we discussed the fact that there's been more activity in this particular area in the past 6 months than there have been in the past 6 years. And so this study, coming out as a consumer-facing study, kind of reads the market and tells us what kind of acceptance we might have in the market when we're really to fully go forward in terms of releasing this project. So a little bit about the study. This is, again, a consumer-facing study. And when we started doing the study, we realized that so much had changed in the emergency alerting and information space that we didn't want to just do a study because we weren't sure if we were going to ask the right questions. So we actually did a study to figure out how to do the study. So we did a small sample, and we asked open-ended questions about of Americans, just saying, where do you turn to first when you hear about a local emergency? What information sources? We didn't want to give them a list that was our preconceived idea of where people should go. We wanted to know where people actually go. So we did a survey just to determine that. And then we took the findings from that study, put it into a bigger study, and that was the 2,000-piece survey that went out that the results I'm going to share with you today. So the first thing we asked them to rate a hypothetical emergency app. We didn't tell them it was from a broadcaster or from a broadcast technology association. We just told them it was going to be an app, and we were creating it, and it would have features that had never been seen in these kind of apps before. All of that is 100% true. And we asked them to rate which of these features would you like to have in an app? And these are some of the results that came up. Almost 2/3 of American consumers want the availability to receive geo-targeted alerts. Over half chose the ability to select only the alerts they want to receive. Half chose the ability to opt into a constantly updated stream of emergency information, something broadcasters are in a very good position to do with their news departments. Almost half said they want a system that keeps working when their internet goes down. And that is something ATSC 3 related AE and I service can do because they operate independently of the internet. Also, more than 1/3 wanted a system that keeps going when their cell service goes down. I thought it was interesting that more people were afraid of their internet service going down than their cell service going down. Anyway, that was the first result, and it was kind of exciting because these are features that some of them only ATSC 3 Advanced Emergency Information Services can deliver. We also asked, how much would you pay for this thing? So we asked a question that said, when you go to buy your next mobile phone, how much extra would you pay to receive these extra services? 2/3 said $5, almost half said $10, over 1/3 said $25. So there's a market, there's value placed on these kinds of services, and people perceive that value and they're willing to pay for it if they're given the opportunity to. So then we wanted to find out, where do people actually go for their emergency information? Because broadcasters right now, we needed to know where we stand to know how to build on our strengths and compensate for our weaknesses going forward. So one of the open-ended questions asks just that. Where do you first turn after you hear about a local emergency, a credible local emergency? And these were the 6 groups that rose above the fray. When you analyze a study like this, you're going through thousands of written-in responses, and you're categorizing them. It was quite a lengthy process, but mobile phones, TV news, websites, Google, social media, radio. And those were what we call them first stops. Traditionally, when a media company does a study like this, they're called information sources, but we discovered that the first place that American consumers go to, it's not always an information source. Google is not an information source. a mobile phone is not an information source. It's a conduit to get to you somewhere else. So we thought we had to come up with a new category to describe what the behavior of American consumers is, because all too often the creators of surveys shape the nature of the questions and say, well, we're a media company, they all better be media organizations you select and offer. So that was the first stops. Then we asked a follow-up question to that, which is, okay, once you get to your first stop, what emergency information services sources do you go to? And this was the list, again, going through thousands of responses and categorizing them out. Local government sources were number one, local TV stations were number two. So, all right, so that's the basics of what the study was about. Let me show you some of the takeaways that I thought were relevant, and then we'll ask some questions and see what you have to think about things that are of interest to you. So, first one was that mobile phones and Google, while they're not information services, they do play a role in the search for them. And I'll show you the results of the first question, which was those first stops. So this was how it came out. When you ask Americans, where do they turn to first for emergency information in a time of a local crisis, mobile phones are the first place they turn to. TV news is the second place they go to. And between mobile phones and TV news, that's about 2/3 of all Americans turn to those two. And after that, it kind of drops down. You've got a couple of 10%ers with websites, Google, social media, et cetera, et cetera. But you can see here that Google and mobile phones are not an information source, but it's the first place they go. It helps people get to where they want to go. It may not be where they want to go, but it helps you get there. So it's an intermediate step, and that's important to know as we develop strategies to roll out our services, because it's important to know what role mobile phones are playing and what role search engines and intermediaries like Google are playing. So there's some really good news for emergency managers. First of all, if you look at this, slide, this is the slide that shows where people turn to after they go to their first stop. Where do you go for actual information? Local government information sources was number one by a pretty good margin, and local TV news stations was a pretty good second place. But here's the tricky part. Local government information sources didn't make the cut as a first stop. Very few people went to their local government information sources first, largely because they probably don't know who they are. We discovered that all of the information sources, all of the first stops that people go to are places they're used to going to. They go to Facebook all the time. They listen to their local TV station all the time. If someone's tuning into their local emergency managers all the time, they live in a very dangerous neighborhood. Anyway, so the bad news is that few search for local emergency managers initially. They're dependent on other parties to get them to the right place. They're dependent on broadcasters. They're dependent on Facebook, whatever. Okay? Anyway, I thought I'd do the same analysis for broadcasters. And the great news for broadcasters is that they're a strong number two, both as a first stop and as an information source. And it's interesting to note, if we take a quick look at it, that so when you look at first stops, yes, mobile phones were more frequently accessed than local TV news was, but mobile phones didn't make the cut as an information source, and broadcasters did. And it may be that local government sources was the first choice for information sources, but again, they didn't make the cut as a first stop. Broadcasters were a solid number two in both of those categories, which kind of makes them pretty essential. So going back to this, the weakness of broadcasters that this study revealed was in terms of appeal to younger viewers. And let's see. So I did a cross tabulation where we tabulated out by age category that same chart about first stops. So if you look at the boomers, the older generation, local TV news broadcast is the source for emergency information by far, outstripping all others, including mobile phones. But if you go to the next generation and the younger generation, by the time you get down to Generation Z, broadcasters have very weak penetration among the youngest of all viewers. Now, Generation Z, if they were college goers, they would be a year or so out of college. So these are not exactly the titans of industry, but unfortunately, as time goes on, these people will be more important. And this really points up the importance of ATSC 3 and the ability to get broadcasters much more deeply involved with mobile television, because that's kind of our Achilles heel right now with younger viewers. Is we don't have apps. While every TV station has a mobile app, it's not at the level of app development that younger viewers are used to experiencing. Okay, let's see. Another thing we discovered was that where a American consumer goes to first, as a first stop, often determines which information sources they go to. The two are related. So here's way too much information, but let me just summarize it really quickly. If your first stop is a mobile phone, and 35% of all American consumers go to their mobile phone first, your second stop will be local government, followed by local TV news. But if you go to Google as your first stop will be local government, followed by national news, followed by local TV news, etc. The pattern of where you go for your information is shaped from the very first stop you go to, and it continues on through that process. For all you Dennis Milletti fans, we actually have a chart in the study that talks about where you go down to very fine detail. Anyway, those are my thoughts for now. Do we have any questions? Okay. All right. Well, I've got a few other slides I can show if no questions. First of all, I'd like to mention that you can download this study. By the way, these just arrived about 10 minutes ago, and this is the full study. You're welcome to take a copy with you. They're all on the counters everywhere. And you can download them by visiting atscadvocate.com, which is our download site for content at the One Media division of Sinclair Broadcast Group. And we've kind of bundled this document with a document that covered. We just had a AE&I webinar series, a 3-part series, and if you download this, as part of that download, you'll get access to a review of each of the webinars, as well as a link to a video of the webinars. Okay. All right. For all you Dennis Milletti fans, this is the chart I was referring to. This goes down into incredible detail. So across the top, you can see the first one-stop people went to, websites, mobile phones, TV news across the top. And then below each of those titles, in descending order, is a percentage of the people who went to that first stop who visited all the other information sources. They all add up to 100 for that category. This is an incredible amount of detail. Nothing like this has ever been done before. So if you're a real emergency information nerd, this is a great chart. If you're not, it's probably a lot of numbers to look at. Anyway, okay. I'd also like to talk a little bit about some of the entrepreneurial opportunities that this study kind of kicked out. The whole hope of ATSC 3 is that it becomes an entrepreneurial's playground. New spectrum availability with a lot of IP control and interactivity. There's got to be a way to create other apps, other applications. And one of the things I did with the study is survey what apps people now have on their phone. Okay, so let me just take a look here. Okay, come down. Okay, so this is a list of, we asked the question, if you could easily download an app that covered these areas, would you want to add it to your phone? And on the roadmap of the ATSC standard is a process by which you can aggregate emergency information apps. So anyway, this is what the result was. So there was a fair amount of things. Then I asked, which apps do you have on your phone now? And there was a big contrast between these two. And I put together a chart that showed them side by side. So, all right. So the dark blue is apps that are on your phone, and the aqua are apps that you would like to add. So anywhere where there's a big contrast, where there's way more people who want information on that topic than now have it on their phone, if I were an entrepreneur, I would say that's an opportunity to develop a new emergency information app and align it with the ATSC standard. Some of the biggest contrasts were man-made threats, active shooters, things like that seem to be on people's minds. And anyway, there's a lot of detail here, and it'll be much easier to read it in here when you get a chance. This was the full chart of the features of the ATSC standard that people said they wanted to hear about, or that they were interested in using for their personal use. There were some surprises here, both in terms of which features people said they wanted and some of the ones that were less enthusiastic about it. It's no surprise that targeted alerting was the number one category. That's been a problem for both emergency managers and broadcasters for years, because if you got the Super Bowl playing and an emergency alert comes in, what do you do? So anyway, okay. Anyway. And I guess, just a closing thought. When I was analyzing all of the information sources and first stops and looking at where people were highly rating things, the kind of destinations that really were critical for people, it was really hard to miss that there really were three of them. There were local emergency managers. They were the number one, by far, most sought after destination for emergency information that local American consumers seek out. Then there were mobile phones, which dominated the first stop category. And then there was local TV news, which was a strong second in both of those categories, where each of the leaders of the other categories flamed out completely. So again, local emergency managers, first kind of stop for local emergency information, but had virtually no presence as a first stop. Mobile phones that had the number one lead with first stops, but nobody wrote them in as an information source. They were strictly a conduit to get to things. But local TV news showed up very strongly in both. So I think these are the three tent poles where emergency managers and content creators should be focusing on. And this is where we're starting from. So the good news is that broadcasters have a great start. The challenging news is that if you look at where younger people are going as a first stop, local broadcasters are not measuring up in that area. But one of the big features of ATSC 3 is that it is mobile compatible, unlike ATSC 1.0. So we're being given the tools to make this happen, and if we can, I have no doubt that some great things are going to happen. Anyway, any thoughts or any questions? Okay, good stuff. Be sure to take a brochure with you. We've been working on this for a long time, and we were wondering where and when they were ever going to show up. They got lost in NAB purgatory somewhere, and they showed up 5 minutes before my presentation, which I thought was a miracle. So divine providence has intervened, and I think we're on our way. Okay, so thank you very much.